generations born since World War II have grown up in a world unlike anything imagined by their predecessors. A world dominated by images of nuclear war and space travel. A world informed by television and computers. A world of global commerce and global warming. And perhaps strangest of all, a world full of UFOs. In mainstream conversation, UFOs don't command the same respect as nuclear war or global commerce. In fact, many people still regard UFOs as the stuff of fantasies, pseudoscience, and paranoia. This public image of UFOs is entirely wrong. It is also intentional, having been carefully crafted by very serious people for many decades. It is meant to mask a very different truth, that UFOs may represent the most important discovery of the century and the greatest agent of global change any of us will ever see. In fact, perhaps the greatest secret of modern times is the amazing relationship between UFOs and the global situation. Hello, I'm Michael Lindemann. In the next 90 minutes, I'll share with you what I've learned during 7 years of full-time research on UFOs and claims of human-alien contact. This subject is full of controversy and mystery, but there is now overwhelming evidence that UFOs are real and that some UFOs represent the presence on Earth of advanced non-human intelligence. Nonetheless, about half of all Americans still mistakenly consider anyone who believes in UFOs to be gullible, uneducated, or crazy. That idea is no accident. Most of us were trained from childhood to regard UFOs as silly and inconsequential. This is an example of social engineering. It was accomplished with a combination of ridicule, intimidation, and disinformation. Its purpose was to mask an important but inconvenient truth. It worked. I know, because I fell for it myself for the first 40 years of my life. Now I know better. But I also know that the millions of citizens who still don't grasp the reality and importance of UFOs, including many scientists and most of our elected officials, are not stupid. They've been systematically deceived, along with everyone else. This program is a tool that you can use to help break down that deception. The fact is, you won't be alone. Today, more people than ever before are forcefully demanding the truth on UFOs. More than ever, military and government officials, NASA astronauts, scientists, and other qualified witnesses are breaking their silence and telling what they know. More experiencers than ever before are braving the ridicule of their peers to describe their incredible encounters. More good quality books and television programs than ever before are dealing with the UFO phenomenon. In this atmosphere, many researchers expect a major breakthrough in the near future. While such predictions have been made before and turned out wrong, conditions have never been better for official UFO revelations. However, the political risk in such revelations is very high, and it remains unlikely that our government or any other major government will divulge anything about UFOs that isn't absolutely necessary or politically useful. Bottom line, we might be told something in the next few years, but not necessarily the truth. Certainly not the whole truth. Actually, it's very unlikely that anyone knows the whole truth on UFOs. That, of course, is part of the problem. Though UFOs are shrouded in mystery, some things are becoming clear. Mountains of testimony from credible witnesses, along with thousands of official documents, photos, radar tracks, physical traces, and other evidence, demonstrate beyond any reasonable doubt that UFOs are real. This means that physical objects are sighted in the sky and sometimes on the ground that appear to be intelligently manufactured and controlled and are not misidentified human-built aircraft, natural phenomena, or hoaxes. On the other hand, some supposed UFOs are in fact human-built aircraft far more unusual than most observers expect to see, and possibly so secret that even top military officials are not aware of them. These human UFOs represent an important factor in the overall UFO controversy. But evidence also indicates that at least some of the genuine UFOs are vehicles created by one or more types of technically advanced, non-human intelligent beings that I will call aliens. Such alien beings have been sighted on numerous occasions by credible witnesses. Like their craft, they take at least several distinct forms. Their nature and point of origin remain unclear. They are not necessarily extraterrestrials, that is, from other planets or distant star systems, although some of them may be. Their craft appear to employ technologies human science does not understand. They also appear to be masters of concealment and deception, and their intentions are mostly inscrutable. This alien presence represents an awesome political challenge, a force so strange and powerful that it could disrupt the momentum of history on a global scale in completely unpredictable ways. Only a small and privileged group of human leaders currently possess enough information to assess this critical challenge. Among this group, several suppositions seem to have emerged. Number one, the human race is incapable of controlling alien activity in any way. In particular, there is no rational military response to alien activity. Number two, aliens of one or more kinds have visited Earth for many years, possibly millennia, and may have influenced human social development from its beginnings. Number three, there is no imminent invasion or obvious tangible alien threat. Number four, the strangeness of the aliens and their long-term covert influence on human affairs constitute their main disruptive potential if openly acknowledged. And number five, for reasons of their own, the aliens seem to have preferred concealment and inscrutability, at least until recently. That is, the so-called UFO cover-up is at least partly an alien creation. Guided by these suppositions, the human custodians of alien information have pursued an aggressive international effort to contain or minimize the disruptive potential of human-alien contact by controlling public access and response to UFO and alien phenomena through policies of secrecy, deception, denial, and even terror. But today there is evidence that the containment approach to UFO secrecy is no longer working. If so, the official custodians of UFO secrecy may now be focused mainly on minimizing the negative consequences of genuine revelations by the aliens themselves, the timing of which our leaders can neither predict nor prevent. The alien presence is the least understood, least recognized, but potentially most impactful of several factors now pushing our world toward a state of grave crisis. Two other better-known factors are, first of all, the threat posed by weapons of mass destruction, especially nuclear weapons, which, despite the so-called end of the Cold War, continue to be developed and deployed by many nations around the world. And second, the multiple threats of ecological catastrophe, driven by such factors as population growth, global warming, ozone depletion, and rainforest cutting, all of which are on the rise despite urgent warnings from many scientists and concerned citizens. Of potentially great importance to the human future is the fact that many human experiencers of alien contact bring back dire predictions of coming catastrophe due to war or environmental destruction, or develop a missionary zeal to help prevent global war and protect the Earth's environment. Abduction researcher John Mack even suggests that abduction itself may be a corrective initiative, a positive alien counterforce to the multiple threats of war and environmental breakdown. Whatever the true nature of the alien presence may be, it has dangerously confounded the Western mind. Unlike some earlier cultures that seemed able to accept non-human intelligence as a natural part of the cosmos, our culture has not yet learned how to deal appropriately with something this strange and unexpected. Individuals who work with this subject, whether as experiencers or researchers, often discover that their social relations, their jobs, even their personal stability may be at risk. Consequently, I believe the alien presence requires us all to grow, to become stronger and clearer, and to help one another navigate in a world much stranger than we've been taught to expect. Without a doubt, UFO stories often sound so absurd that public disbelief is an understandable reaction. But that does not mean that UFO experiencers are mentally or medically deficient, as some skeptics say. The fact is, clinical studies show that UFO witnesses as a group are healthy and intelligent, not socially marginal. One of the latest studies was conducted at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada, and published in the November 1993 edition of the prestigious Journal of Abnormal Psychology. Among the 49 UFO experiencers in that study, 10 reported seeing a craft close up, 10 saw an alien being, 7 described verbal contact, 8 reported telepathic contact, 7 recalled total body paralysis, 8 reported missing time, and 2 recalled going on board. Yet the Carleton University psychologists found these people to be as intelligent and mentally healthy as other people and not more prone to fantasy. Furthermore, like previous studies, the Carleton study found the majority of UFO experiencers to be, quote, solid representatives of the North American middle class, unquote. That is, well-educated citizens in white-collar occupations with no special tendencies towards psychopathology or fantasy proneness. Thus, the Carleton researchers concluded there is no reason to assume that UFO reports arise from some kind of defect in the experiencer. It is much more likely that the reports arise from objective events. Of course, some UFO reports do result from observer error. With careful analysis, many reports have a conventional explanation. Bright stars, unusual meteors, strange clouds, or exotic human-built aircraft that officially don't exist. In fact, the U.S. government is flying several kinds of super-secret aircraft that may account for highly convincing but erroneous UFO reports. These are called black aircraft because they're funded by the so-called black budget, a pool of money Congress allocates each year for secret programs with virtually no strings attached. Some programs are so secret that even the president is not permitted access. Journalist Timothy Weiner of the Philadelphia Inquirer won a Pulitzer Prize in 1989 for his expose on the black budget, which he says is costing American taxpayers at least $35 billion every year. And high on the list of our blackest programs are super-secret aircraft, planes that officially don't exist and officially aren't even possible. Planes like the Aurora, a hypersonic, exotically powered reconnaissance aircraft that many civilian aerospace experts insist is flying, even though military brass and the Director of Central Intelligence, among others, have denied it. The Aurora is probably capable of top speeds over 6,000 miles per hour, although the official world speed record for a jet plane is less than half that fast. But the Aurora is not the only human-built UFO. Another exotic possibility is a new type of lighter-than-air vehicle designed for stealth reconnaissance as well as heavy lifting in remote terrain. Unlike conventional blimps, these craft are reportedly triangular-shaped and flattened top to bottom. They hover silently or glide overhead almost noiselessly, powered by large but extremely quiet jet engines. Often they have numerous bright lights adding to their eerie appearance. Some analysts claim that such craft were used extensively in the Persian Gulf War. Many witnesses have seen them operating in remote parts of California. They may also account for sightings of large triangular-shaped UFOs in northern Alabama, Florida, Pennsylvania, and New York in recent years. So it's not hard to understand how some UFO reports arise from honest observer error. But it's also an indisputable fact that there are real UFOs, bizarre flying objects that seem intelligently controlled, for which there is no conventional explanation. The armed forces of many nations know this is true. UFOs have violated highly secure airspace over nuclear arsenals in both the United States and Russia. Over a series of strategic air command bases in the fall of 1975, including Loring Air Force Base in Maine, Wurtsmith in Michigan, Minot in North Dakota, and Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, where a UFO reportedly caused a targeting malfunction in a missile silo. And similarly over a weapons base in Kapustin Yar, Russia, in 1989, where a UFO hovered near the ground for several minutes and shined a beam of light on a building witnessed by at least 7 officers and men. Many military pilots have had harrowing encounters with UFOs in the air. Over Kentucky in 1948, where Captain Thomas Mantell lost his life trying to approach a UFO in his P-51 Mustang. Over Germany in 1951, where a young Gordon Cooper, who would later become an astronaut, saw dozens of saucer-shaped aircraft flying in formation higher and faster than his F-86 jet could go. Over Japan in 1974, where Major Shiro Kubota, piloting an F-4EJ Phantom jet, lost his life in a dogfight with a UFO. Over Belgium in 1990, where F-16 jets locked radar on a UFO, then watched it perform maneuvers no human aircraft could ever match, prompting a Belgian Air Force general to admit on television that he could not explain what had happened. One of the most impressive encounters of this kind happened on October 18, 1973, over Mansfield, Ohio. On that evening at about 11 p.m., 4 U.S. Army reservists in a Bell Huey helicopter were flying northeast from Columbus toward Cleveland. Just outside the town of Mansfield, at an altitude of 2,500 feet, they witnessed a red light off their right side. Suddenly, the light flew straight at the helicopter at an estimated speed over 300 knots. The ranking officer, Captain Lawrence J. Coyne, said later he thought they were about to be rammed by a jet. He took the controls and put the helicopter into a steep dive to avoid a collision. He radioed Mansfield Approach Control to request information on the mystery aircraft, but then he lost radio contact on all channels. Still descending, Coyne saw the red light coming straight toward them. Suddenly, to everyone's amazement, the helicopter started to ascend against the controls. The magnetic compass was spinning wildly. Then an eerie green light filled the entire cabin. Looking up, the crew saw the light shining from one end of a large object hovering near the helicopter. At the other end of the object was a bright red light. The crew described the object as, quote, cigar-shaped, metallic gray, with a dome on top, about 60 feet long, without any portholes or intake openings that we could see, unquote. A family of 5, a mother and 4 adolescents in a car, also watched the encounter from the ground. One said the UFO was like a blimp. Another compared it to a school bus. To these witnesses, the UFO looked somewhat bigger than the helicopter and slightly above it. They also described the intense green light. Captain Coyne said the helicopter rose from 700 feet to 2,800 feet against the controls. Then the UFO began moving away, glowing bright white as it accelerated and disappeared. The helicopter radios returned to normal shortly after the encounter ended. All 4 crewmen were separately debriefed when they reached Cleveland, and later were extensively interviewed by UFO researchers, as were the ground witnesses. On November 27, 1978, then Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence Coyne reported this encounter to a special committee of the United Nations. Describing the UFO, he said, quote, no noticeable wings or landing gears were observed. No vertical or horizontal stabilizers were observed. This object demonstrated its ability to change or maintain altitude headings and speed control. As a result of my experience, I am convinced this object was real and that these types of incidents should require a thorough investigation, unquote. The Mansfield encounter seems accidental, but other cases suggest a different possibility: planned military interaction with alien technology. Consider, for example, the so-called Cash Landrum incident. On December 29, 1980, at about 9 p.m., 3 people witnessed an unusual object hovering over State Road 1485 near Dayton, Texas, not far from Houston. Betty Cash, Vicki Landrum, and Vicki's young grandson Colby were driving home when they noticed a bright light in the sky above. Betty, the driver, stopped in the road when the light became almost blinding, then got out of the car to get a better view. She saw an object hovering a few hundred feet away. She said it seemed roughly diamond-shaped, narrow at the bottom, broader above. Flames spewed from the bottom with an intermittent roaring noise. The heat and light were intense. Soon, Betty was overcome by fear. I felt like I was burning from the inside out, she later said. The only thing I was thinking was, are we going to get out of here alive? Returning to the car, Betty found it was still too hot to drive forward, so they all kept watching as the strange craft moved slowly from the road. Moments later, they saw a fleet of large twin-rotor helicopters flying in the same direction, following the other object. Colby Landrum counted 23 helicopters. With the craft gone, they drove home. And there the case might have ended, just a weird UFO sighting by 2 women and a boy. But instead, on that very night, all 3 witnesses got deathly sick. The next morning, Betty Cash couldn't get out of bed. After 4 days of intense suffering at home, she was taken to the hospital, where her physician concluded that she was suffering from acute radiation poisoning. Her symptoms included severe headache, nausea, oozing skin sores, and hair loss. Vicki and Colby Landrum also showed symptoms of radiation exposure, less strong than Betty's perhaps because they didn't get out of the car. Betty Cash was in the hospital approximately 6 weeks. To this day, all three have serious health problems. Betty has developed cancer. Because of the Army-style helicopters, Betty and Vicki thought the UFO must belong to the U.S. military. They filed a $20 million lawsuit against the government for exposing them to radiation. They were interviewed by military personnel at Bergstrom Air Force Base, but were never offered any explanations or assistance. In August of 1986, their lawsuit was dismissed from U.S. District Court after military and NASA officials said no such aircraft was owned or operated by the government. A man named John Schuessler is the leading expert on the Cash Landrum incident. Schuessler's background is engineering. An executive for a major aerospace firm, he has worked on spacecraft development since the beginning of America's manned space program. After thousands of hours investigating the Cash Landrum case, he believes the strange aircraft employed a propulsion technology unlike anything in our space program. He has located other witnesses to both the UFO and the helicopters, but he has not discovered the origin of the UFO, what it was doing over rural Texas, who was piloting it, or what the military had to do with it. But one thing is clear, that many large helicopters cannot be organized for such a mission on short notice. In fact, an Army colonel who requested anonymity told me he had run an inquiry on the helicopters for the Army Inspector General's office. He couldn't find any military base with that many large helicopters on hand, nor any way that the Cash Landrum scenario could have happened without a lot of advanced planning. He told me he thinks the incident did occur, but he can't explain what the unknown craft might have been, nor how the military was involved. So here we have three witnesses mysteriously injured by an unexplained close encounter. An aerospace expert who says the mystery craft was not human technology, and an Army spokesman who says the incident must have required advanced military planning. Though many questions remain, the implications are disturbing. Was a secret military group testing an aircraft that somehow got off course? An aircraft that employed technology from elsewhere? Or is the truth even stranger than that? So far, we simply don't know. But the suspicion that some super-secret government or military faction has possession of alien technology is rooted in the most famous UFO case of all, the Roswell incident of 1947. In recent years, much has been learned about this important case, and the U.S. Air Force has been pushed to make an important admission. The wreckage picked up from a ranch northwest of Roswell, New Mexico in early July 1947 was not that of a weather balloon, as the military had insisted for decades. The revised official story, announced in Washington, D.C. on September 8, 1994, was that the wreckage came from a huge, super-secret reconnaissance balloon codenamed Project Mogul. There's no doubt that Project Mogul was launching large balloon arrays over New Mexico in 1947, and there's no doubt they were top secret at the time. So, if such an object crashed on a ranch, it might explain some of the strange military behavior associated with the Roswell incident. But now, Mogul records have been declassified, and there's no direct evidence that a Mogul balloon did crash during the first few days of July anywhere near the Foster Ranch, where ranch manager Mac Brazel found the legendary debris. Most Roswell researchers remain unconvinced that Project Mogul could account for the large amount of wreckage described by Roswell Army Airfield's base intelligence officer, Major Jesse Marcel. Nor has Project Mogul quelled the claims of another crash site, or the accounts of an almost intact craft recovered there, a craft which, according to new information from alleged eyewitnesses, did not match conventional ideas of a flying saucer at all, but instead may have looked something like an exotic jet aircraft. With few exceptions, Roswell researchers believe that the wreckage of this extraordinary craft, whatever its real appearance, was shipped off to one or more secret locations for study and back engineering. Even if it had been shattered beyond repair, what secrets it might have revealed. Could such secrets have resulted over 30 years later in the human creation of a seemingly alien aircraft like the one seen by Betty Cash and Vicki Landrum? That is a distinct possibility. But more than anything else about the Roswell incident, Project Mogul does not account for the claim of recovered bodies. Former CIA agent Carl Flock, author of the 1994 report called Roswell in Perspective, strongly believes that Mogul caused at least some of the wreckage. But even he thinks there were bodies because of the testimony of one man, Glenn Dennis. In 1947, Glenn Dennis was a young mortician at the Ballard Funeral Home in Roswell. He was familiar with personnel and procedures at the nearby Roswell Army Airfield because Ballard handled all the military's mortuary needs. On July 7, 1947, Dennis got several odd calls from the base. One caller asked if he had any child-sized, hermetically sealed caskets. Another caller asked his advice on preserving decaying flesh. Glenn Dennis began to wonder if there had been a crash at the base. Later that day, he drove to the base on routine business and decided to check in at the infirmary, something he often did. In the hallway, he met a nurse he knew well. She seemed very upset and told him to leave right away. Before he could find out why, he was stopped by two MPs who threatened him with violence if he didn't leave immediately. They also warned him to tell nobody about anything unusual at the base. They even called his father and repeated the warning. Glenn Dennis says the nurse called the next day and asked to see him. They met in the Officers Club conference room at the base. The nurse was nearly hysterical, Dennis says. She told him she had assisted on autopsies of several strange bodies at the base infirmary. She said medical specialists had been flown in from the East Coast, from the Mayo Clinic and other places, and no one in the room knew each other. She said the stench from the bodies was overwhelming. The nurse gave him a drawing she'd made. "Guard this with your life and give me your sacred oath that you'll never repeat my name," she insisted. Glenn Dennis says she was transferred overseas only a few weeks later and then disappeared. He heard she was killed in a plane crash, but to this day, that has not been confirmed. He suspects she may still be alive somewhere. He has never disclosed her name. Glenn Dennis kept the nurse's drawing in a private file for years, but never showed it to anyone. In 1990, with the help of an artist, he recreated the drawing from memory, and that image has been widely distributed. Based on Glenn Dennis's drawing, plus testimony from several other alleged witnesses, the bodies from the Roswell incident were small, under 5 feet tall, but nearly human-looking. If this story is true, then at least part of the U.S. government has known since 1947, if not longer, that alien beings have reached the Earth from elsewhere. They have known that the human race is neither alone nor isolated in the universe. They have recovered alien artifacts containing a treasure of advanced technology. And of course, they have hidden and denied it all for nearly half a century. Today, a growing chorus of responsible voices are saying that all this is probably true. One of these is Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell, who walked on the moon in 1971. Starting in early 1996, Mitchell began making public statements about the UFO subject. On the NBC television program Dateline on April 19, 1996, he said, quote, "I have had the opportunity to meet with people from 3 countries who, in the course of their official duties, claim to have had personal, first-hand encounter experiences with extraterrestrials." Asked if he really thinks extraterrestrials have visited the Earth, he said, "The evidence is very strong, and portions of it are classified." Mitchell, in fact, leaves no doubt that he suspects a government cover-up. As for the Project Mogul explanation for Roswell, he says, "The people that were there say that's utter nonsense. Come on, let's have the truth." One of the world's richest men, Lawrence Rockefeller, wants the truth too, and he's spending money to get it. He gave at least $250,000 to support the research of Harvard professor Dr. John Mack, the most respected academic so far, who says that aliens are abducting humans. Since at least 1994, Rockefeller has been urging the Clinton administration to open up secret UFO files. Then in 1996, Rockefeller published a 170-page book called Unidentified Flying Objects Briefing Document, the best available evidence. Only 1,000 copies were originally printed, not for the general public, but for exclusive distribution to heads of state and other influential leaders. This seems to be part of a strategy to build support for official UFO disclosures. Rockefeller's report emphasizes the global distribution of UFO cases. UFO incursions over a Soviet military base in 1989. A high-speed chase between UFOs and jets over Tehran, Iran in 1976, certified by the American CIA. An encounter with a landed UFO in Manitoba, Canada in 1967, in which the witness, Stephen Michalak, was injured. And the spectacular 1964 sighting of a landed UFO and humanoid beings by police officer Lonnie Zamora in New Mexico. By all accounts, one of the most impressive close encounters on record. On April 24th, 1964, at about 5 p.m., Officer Zamora was pursuing a speeding car near Socorro, New Mexico, when he saw something bright in the sky and heard a roaring sound. Thinking a nearby dynamite shed might have exploded, he abandoned his chase and headed for the shed. Nearing that location, he saw something bizarre on the ground, an egg-shaped object on 4 thin legs. Next to it, he clearly saw 2 small beings dressed in white coveralls. He thought they looked like children. As he stopped his car, the 2 beings disappeared. As he got out for a closer look, he saw flames shooting from beneath the object and heard a loud roar. Ducking for cover behind his car, he next saw the object hovering silently a few feet above the ground. He then watched as it accelerated away toward the horizon. Zamora's backup, Sergeant Sam Chavez of the New Mexico State Police, arrived just as the object disappeared in the distance. Chavez found Zamora in a highly agitated state, crouching behind his car. The 2 officers quickly descended a low hill to the place where the object had stood. They found ample evidence of his presence, symmetrical marks on the ground where the legs had been, smoldering vegetation, even small footprints. Within hours, an Army captain from the nearby White Sands Missile Range and an FBI special agent were on the scene. They interviewed Zamora extensively and corroborated the physical evidence. Later, the CIA also investigated the case. NASA and the Air Force ruled out any human-built aircraft. In a classified memo to the CIA, then Director of the Air Force Project Blue Book, Major Hector Quintanilla, declared this the most puzzling UFO case he had ever seen. Quote, "There is no doubt that Lonnie Zamora saw an object which left quite an impression on him. There is also no question about Zamora's reliability. He's a serious police officer, a pillar of his church, and a man well versed in recognizing airborne vehicles in this area. He is puzzled by what he saw, and frankly, so are we. This is the best documented case on record, and still we have been unable, in spite of thorough investigation, to find the vehicle or other stimulus that scared Zamora to the point of panic." Unquote. In Zamora's case, both the craft and the beings left their marks on the ground, undeniable evidence of a seemingly alien encounter, evidence collected and studied by the military, the FBI, NASA, and other agencies, undeniable evidence. And yet, the denials continue. Scientific experts often declare that such cases are absurd because the aliens couldn't get here from another star system. This argument assumes that aliens must be extraterrestrials, a widely held but perhaps erroneous belief. The so-called extraterrestrial hypothesis is only one of several possible ways to explain the existence of aliens. For example, aliens could be time travelers from our own future, or beings from another dimension or parallel universe. Nonetheless, many experiencers of alien phenomena, and many UFO researchers as well, believe that at least some aliens probably are extraterrestrials, physical beings from another world. In fact, compared with time travel or crossing dimensions, traveling from another planet seems relatively mundane. After all, we humans have already done it ourselves in a limited way. Nonetheless, conventional science says extraterrestrials can't get here because other planets in our own solar system are obviously uninhabited, and the speed of light represents an overwhelming barrier against interstellar travel. But not every scientist considers this argument valid. Physicist Dr. H.E. Puthoff, a leading expert in relativity, states in a recent paper that, quote, "Travel at speeds exceeding the conventional velocity of light could occur without the violation of fundamental physical laws. As a result, the possibility of reduced time interstellar travel, whether by advanced extraterrestrial civilizations at present or ourselves in the future, is not fundamentally constrained by physical principles." Unquote. Puthoff bases this view on a detailed analysis of proposals first set forth by physicist Manuel Alcubierre in 1994. Alcubierre demonstrated that, quote, "By distorting the local space-time metric in the region of a spaceship, it would be possible to achieve motion faster than the speed of light as seen by observers outside the disturbed region, without violating the local velocity of light constraint within the region." Unquote. In effect, Alcubierre and Puthoff have shown that it is feasible to imagine a technological means of altering certain properties of space-time in a localized region such that an object inside that region could travel at many times the speed of light when observed from outside the locally altered space-time. Such a technology would be exactly analogous to so-called warp drive, a familiar concept to any fan of Star Trek. When we consider the radical progress humans have made in aerospace technology in just the last 100 years, it's probably illogical to bet against further radical advances, such as warp drive. 100 years ago, human flight was limited to balloons and flimsy box gliders. Powered flight began in 1903. Earth's first artificial satellite, Sputnik, was launched in 1957. In 1969, humans landed on the moon. Today, manned space flights are routine, and an unmanned human spacecraft has flown beyond our solar system, sending back telemetry all the way. With so much progress in just 100 years, what might be possible in another 100 or 1,000? Obviously, more than we can even imagine. So, if there are extraterrestrials out there somewhere, might some of them have the means to visit us here on Earth? Of course they might. But do extraterrestrials even exist? Not so long ago, the very idea of intelligent life on other worlds was considered improbable by most scientists, but that opinion has entirely changed in recent years. Today, nearly all astronomers, astrophysicists, and other space scientists openly believe that the universe is teeming with life, some of it certainly intelligent and probably more advanced than ourselves. The official Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, SETI, got an enormous boost in late 1995 with the first clear evidence of planets around another star. In early 1996, more planets were found. One of the stars, Virginis 70, even had unusual radio signals coming from it. Scientists didn't say that those signals are intelligent, but suddenly a chorus of experts began predicting the imminent discovery of life on other worlds. Astronomer Frank Drake, credited as the father of radio SETI, declared, quote, "The real signal, when it's found, will be unmistakable. I strongly believe that we shall find one before the year 2000, unquote. Other astronomers meeting in March 1996 in Toledo, Spain, issued a news release stating that they expect to confirm life on other worlds within 25 years. Yes, definitely there's life out there, said Mike Kaplan, director of NASA's New Origins project. For the first time, it's not a dream, it's just a question of time, he told the Reuters news agency. And when they find the unmistakable signal, the certainty of other intelligence, then what? Quote, "Discovering life out there would change everything. Philosophy, religion. We would find out that we're not that special," NASA's Mike Kaplan declared. And that may be the understatement of the decade. Especially if we Earthlings are the ones who've already been discovered. In the United States, the first wave of public interest in human-alien contact began with the UFO events of 1947 and peaked in the 1950s, when so-called contactees, such as George Adamski, Truman Bethlehem, and George Van Tassel, claimed to be meeting friendly space people in flying saucers. Though some early contactees attracted large followings, their claims were ridiculed by the press, the military, and even most of the serious UFO researchers of the time. Tales of beautiful, benevolent, human-looking women and men from Venus, Mars, and various imaginary planets seemed hopelessly naive and absurd. One of the most persistent messages of the space people, according to the contactees, was for human beings to eliminate the threat of nuclear war. To social psychologists, this seemed to be just an expression of the widespread fear accompanying the advent of nuclear weapons and the Cold War, certainly not evidence of alien wisdom. By the early 1960s, most of the contactees had been discredited and were fading into obscurity. Nonetheless, at least one important feature of the early contact stories has resurfaced in the new generation of contact cases that burst into public view during the 1980s. Many recent experiencers say that they've been given dire warnings of coming nuclear war or environmental catastrophe if humans don't change their ways. Some feel they've been given a mission to help save the world or to prepare humanity for a coming time of calamity and transformation. These messages represent the latest twist in the complex and controversial phenomenon called abduction. During the 1980s, the claim that aliens abduct humans went from the lunatic fringe right to the center of UFO research. But long before abduction gained such notoriety, there were remarkable events taking place. Events more remarkable in retrospect, perhaps, because they fit a pattern that would only become clear years later. Back in 1967, the only abduction case that had received any public notice in the United States was the famous encounter of Betty and Barney Hill. But to the average citizen, the Hill case was a fluke, just another weird story that comes and goes in the news. Certainly not the tip of an enormous alien iceberg. So it's likely that police officer Herbert Schirmer had few thoughts about alien abduction as he patrolled the streets of Ashland, Nebraska in his squad car during the early morning hours of December 3rd, 1967. At about 2:30 a.m., he saw a group of lights near the ground and thought he could make out a semi-trailer off the road. Approaching to investigate, he saw the lights rise up and disappear in the night sky. When he returned to the police station at 3 a.m., he wrote in the station log, "Saw a flying saucer at the junction of Highway 6 and 63, believe it or not." He went home with a splitting headache and an inexplicable red welt on the side of his neck. It was later noted that 20 minutes were not recorded in his personal log that night. But apart from this, Schirmer had no evidence that anything else had happened. Though only 22 years old, Herbert Schirmer became chief of police a short time later. He had previously served in the Navy and was the son of a career Air Force officer, not the sort of man to become obsessed about UFOs. But only 2 months after becoming chief of police, he resigned from the force. He said he couldn't get the UFO encounter out of his mind. He was experiencing terrible headaches and found it difficult to concentrate on his work. On the advice of a friend, Schirmer sought the assistance of a hypnotherapist. Under hypnosis, he went back to the time of his UFO sighting. He said that the lights, instead of flying away, came toward him. He saw a large football-shaped object land near his car. Several humanoid beings got out and approached him. One of them shined a light in his eyes through the windshield. Without knowing why, Schirmer rolled down his window. One of the beings reached in and grabbed his neck. Seconds later, he found himself standing outside his car. The being asked, "Would you shoot at a spaceship?" "No, sir," Schirmer said. The beings then took him aboard. Schirmer described his captors as 4.5 to 5 feet tall, with heads much like humans, though somewhat narrower. Their skin looked grayish-white. Their noses were fairly flat, and their mouths looked like slits that didn't move. Their eyes were slightly slanted. The eyelids didn't blink. They wore silvery gray jumpsuits with an emblem of a winged serpent on the chest, and a tight-fitting headpiece with a small antenna on the left side. Schirmer said that during his brief time on board, the aliens communicated both audibly and telepathically as they showed him around their craft. He recalled seeing a smaller craft that was parked on board. He was told it was used for surveillance. He was told that these beings had been watching the human race for a very long time and were engaged in what he called a breeding analysis program. They explained that they purposely contacted people at random so as not to reveal too much of a pattern. "They want to keep us confused," Schirmer said, "so we won't get too upset as we gradually become aware of their presence." He felt sure they weren't hostile. They told him he wouldn't remember most of what happened during the encounter, and that they would visit him again. Many parts of Schirmer's story have been repeated by other abductees in recent years. In 1967, though, such details were almost unheard of. On November 5th, 1975, lumberjack Travis Walton became the subject of the best documented UFO abduction on record. Travis and 6 other men were thinning timber on a mountainside in Apache Sitgreaves National Forest in northern Arizona. That evening, they were coming down the mountain in an old pickup truck when they saw strange lights through the trees. When they approached, they all clearly saw a classic flying saucer, hovering perhaps 50 feet above the ground. Travis was nearest the passenger door, and he jumped out and walked toward the saucer. His friends yelled for him to get back, but seconds later he was hit by a beam of blue light and knocked violently to the ground. Mike Rogers, the driver, panicked and drove away at high speed. But after driving a short distance and stopping to think, he decided he had to go back. All the men were scared to death. They were sure Travis had been killed, but when they got back there, he was gone. That night, they reported what had happened to the local police. Search teams were sent looking for the body, but they found nothing. Over the next 5 days, the men came under suspicion of murder, so they agreed to take polygraph tests. One of them, Alan Dallas, was too upset to complete his test, but the polygraph examiner said all the other men were truthful when they said they had seen a flying saucer and they had not harmed Travis Walton. Alan Dallas also passed a polygraph test several years later. Meanwhile, after 5 days, Travis turned up on a road outside of town. He said he had regained consciousness lying on the ground and watched the flying saucer fly away. He seemed shocked to hear how long he'd been missing. He can't remember most of what happened while he was missing, but he does remember several amazing things. His first awareness after being hit by the blue beam was of waking up on a hard surface lying on his back. As his eyes focused, he saw several strange creatures looking down at him. They had huge, black, almond-shaped eyes and grayish-white skin. He panicked and jumped off the table he was on, flailing his arms. He grabbed a rod-like object and swung it at the beings, then saw them back out a doorway and disappear. Travis then ran down a passageway into another room. There he saw a chair and what looked like a control panel. As he neared the chair, the room darkened and star patterns began to appear on the walls. Just then, a man entered the room. He looked completely human, tall and muscular, with blonde hair. He was wearing a tight-fitting blue jumpsuit and a helmet on his head. Travis thought he was being rescued. Without speaking, the man motioned him to come along. They went down another corridor. Travis tried to ask questions, but the man said nothing. Soon, they walked down a ramp into a large area that looked like a hangar. This was the first clear indication that Travis had been on the saucer, which he could now see again from the outside. Several other saucer craft were parked nearby, but Travis could not tell if they were on the ground or inside a larger vehicle. The man led the way to a room where Travis saw 3 other human-looking people, including a woman. All wore the same blue outfits, and all were extremely strong and handsome-looking people. They motioned Travis to sit down. Suddenly, the woman produced a small mask-like object and placed it over Travis's face. In moments, he was unconscious. He remembers nothing else until he awoke on the ground days later. Travis Walton also passed several polygraph tests that show that he is truthful when he describes the basic elements of his case. The combined eyewitness testimonies, backed by solid polygraph results, make this case among the strongest on record. A large group of police officers tried but failed to find any evidence of a hoax in this case. Travis Walton has withstood the scrutiny of skeptics for over 20 years, and neither he nor any of the other 6 witnesses have ever changed any part of their story. Meanwhile, since his 1975 encounter, literally thousands of other cases have come to light. The emerging pattern of these events strongly suggests that alien abduction is really taking place. 1987 was a watershed year in UFO research. In 1987, 2 books about alien abduction became international bestsellers. The first, Whitley Strieber's gripping account of his own experiences, called Communion, awakened thousands of readers to the possibility that they, too, might have hidden memories of unearthly contact. For many of these readers, the clue was the face on the cover of Communion, a face that triggered unwanted images in the mind, a face many readers recalled seeing before. 1987 wasn't the first time the face of a so-called gray was shown in public, but it was the year the so-called gray became indelibly linked with claims of abduction. The other major bombshell of 1987 was Bud Hopkins' Intruders, which not only explored the claim that aliens are abducting humans, but proposed a reason why. The aliens, Hopkins said, are harvesting sperm and eggs from human abductees for the purpose of making hybrid children. Outrageous though it sounded, the woman Hopkins called Kathy Davis said she had even been shown a hybrid baby she recognized as her own. That woman, later identified as Debbie Jordan, co-authored with her sister the story of her whole family's alien encounters in the 1994 book called Abducted. By 1994, however, other researchers and many other experiencers had both confirmed and extended the claims of Hopkins and Jordan. In Communion, Whitley Strieber had argued that the nature and purpose of the beings he called the visitors was mysterious, inscrutable, possibly even spiritual. Strieber's encounters were terrifying, he said, but not necessarily bad. Not all the visitors looked like grays, he said, and not all of them were preoccupied with making hybrids. There was more going on, he said, much more. Hopkins took the view that the situation was not all that complex and ambiguous. Instead, he argued that the aliens were deceptive and wanted to confuse the abductees, creating screen memories and other distractions that seemed real to the abductees but weren't. Temple University history professor David Jacobs, one of the only men who ever wrote a PhD dissertation on UFOs, took Hopkins' side in his own book on abduction called Secret Life, published in 1994. Describing some 60 abduction cases he had investigated, Jacobs said that the abduction experience was quite uniform and definitely focused on sexual reproduction. Critics accused him of simply ignoring evidence that didn't fit. Jacobs said that contrary evidence probably resulted from alien deception or abductee confusion rather than reality. Meanwhile, into the fray came the most surprising newcomer of all, Harvard University's Dr. John Mack. A famous psychiatrist and former Pulitzer Prize winner, Mack brought the weight of his own accomplishments and Harvard prestige to the abduction controversy. In his 1994 book, Abduction: Human Encounters with Aliens, he left no doubt of his personal conviction that abduction is, in some sense, real. The stories he heard from his subjects, he said, could not be attributed to any known pathology. These people weren't crazy, they were traumatized by real events, he said. The implications seemed unavoidable. In at least some cases, human beings might actually be taken by aliens. But are such events literally physical, or could they occur in some subtler way? Max said he simply couldn't tell. Many of his subjects reported sexual examinations, hybrid children, and other familiar features of the abduction scenario previously described by Hopkins and Jacobs. But in addition, Max's cases included a wide assortment of other incredible things: out-of-body experiences, soul mergings between humans and aliens, intense spiritual revelations. And many times, he noted, abductees are given important, often life-altering information or predictions about the human future. At first glance, such claims seemed so unusual that other researchers feared Max's influence might do more harm than good for abduction research. At the same time, Harvard University was plainly not amused. A committee was formed to review Max's work. He was threatened with academic censure. Attacked by academic foes on one side and more conservative abduction researchers on the other, John Mack seemed for a time like a man without a country. But not for long. The Harvard committee eventually realized they could not censure John Mack without doing severe harm to the principle of academic freedom. In the end, they admonished him to be mindful of Harvard's good name, but otherwise agreed he should continue to work as he saw fit. Mack says that his recent research shows that abduction is every bit as strange, complex, and multidimensional as stated in his book, and now more people are listening. As this program is recorded in mid-1996, it's still not clear if John Mack's view of abduction is more accurate than Bud Hopkins. Besides that, most scientists still scoff at the whole idea. But what is clear is that many abductees agree with important parts of Mack's view, especially the idea that alien abductors are instructing, warning, and preparing abductees for the future. Mack says abductees are shown that the fate of the Earth is linked to the larger cosmos. Nothing in my work on UFO abductions has surprised me as much as the discovery that what is happening to the Earth has not gone unnoticed elsewhere in the universe, Mack wrote in his book. That the Earth itself and its potential destruction could have an effect beyond its own environment was altogether outside the worldview in which I was raised. But it would appear from the information that abductees receive that the Earth has value or importance in a larger, interrelated cosmic system that mirrors the interconnectedness of life on Earth. The alien abduction phenomenon may represent, then, some sort of corrective initiative. Mack emphasized that many abductees receive intensely graphic images of vast destruction, coupled with a feeling that they must play a role in the coming hard times. Scenes of the Earth devastated by a nuclear holocaust, vast panoramas of lifeless, polluted landscapes and waters, and apocalyptic images of giant earthquakes, firestorms, floods, and even fractures of the planet itself are shown by the aliens, he wrote. Some abductees are given assignments in this future holocaust. It is the kind of knowledge that must be translated into action. Mack's words are moving, but are they accurate? Do abductees really have these experiences? I decided to find out for myself. In May of 1996, I designed a questionnaire and sent it to 10 self-professed abductees who had agreed to answer it sight unseen. I began by asking if they had ever received information, predictions, or warnings during their contact experiences. All of them said yes. I asked how important this information seemed to be in the overall context of abduction. All but 2 gave it high or top importance. The other 2 gave it medium importance. I then asked each abductee to indicate what kinds of warnings, predictions, or other information seemed strongest or most urgent to them. I asked them to rate each item on a scale of 0 to 10. Results were mixed, but all respondents agreed we are heading for trouble. Here are some of the responses. All but 1 person rated the threat of geological catastrophe, such as major earthquakes or floods, at 8 or higher. 4 of them rated this a 10. 6 respondents rated the threat of collision with an asteroid or comet at 8 or higher. 5 respondents rated the threat of famine or epidemic disease at 8 or higher. Concern over nuclear war varied greatly. 4 respondents rated it at 9 or 10, the rest at 6 or lower. 7 respondents said they felt strongly compelled to help save the environment. Half rated this a 10. All of them said they felt compelled to warn or assist other people. Interestingly, all but one shared a sense that humanity will soon undergo a spiritual transformation, or, as one put it, a genetically heightened consciousness. Overall, this group of abductees clearly believes the human race is headed into a time of danger, possibly catastrophe, although most of them also see a positive outcome in the long term. If the predictions received by abductees were entirely unrelated to real global conditions, it would be easy to ignore them, but they are very much in line with current events and trends. The facts of our perilous global situation are no farther away than the daily news. The possibility of massive earthquakes or an impact by a giant asteroid tops the list of global dangers anticipated by many abductees. Both threats are very real. The zone of greatest earthquake danger on Earth today is the so-called Ring of Fire, roughly corresponding to the perimeter of the Pacific Ocean. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, 90% of all quakes occur here. In the average year, experts say, the Earth will have about 18 major earthquakes, measuring 7 or higher on the Richter scale, and one great quake measuring 8 or higher. By this standard, recent years have been a little below average, and there is no statistical indication of an increase in earthquake activity. But there doesn't have to be. One well-placed great quake, for example, near downtown Los Angeles or downtown Tokyo, would make a lasting mark on civilization. And Richter measurement can be misleading. The 6.9 quake that hit Kobe, Japan on January 16, 1995, killed over 5,400 people. Scientifically speaking, it's not yet possible to predict when or where the really big quakes will hit, but sooner or later, they will happen. The threats posed by incoming asteroids and comets are every bit as real. With little fanfare, the federal government is now taking a serious role in scanning outer space for speeding objects that could hit the Earth and cause widespread destruction and death. The first such governmental search in the world, it gives the issue a significant new degree of credibility. The project combines NASA and Air Force tracking equipment and is based at an observatory on top of Mount Haleakala in Maui, Hawaii. Scientists now estimate that up to 1,700 comets and asteroids crossing Earth's path might be big enough to cause global havoc. Potentially devastating collisions are thought to occur about once every 300,000 years. In the new project's first 4 months of operation, 4 previously unknown asteroids were discovered whose orbits intersect that of the Earth. The new system's high rate of discovery implies that many more unknown objects may pose a threat to the Earth. As if to prove the point, an asteroid nearly 1/3 of a mile in diameter bypassed Earth on May 19, 1996, at a distance of about 279,000 miles. In astronomical terms, that's a very close call, with an object that could cause tremendous damage. The asteroid was detected for the first time only 4 days before its nearest approach to the Earth. After earthquakes and asteroids, abductees say, the next greatest cause of global devastation could come from massive floods or tidal waves. Giant waves often accompany earthquakes, of course, and giant waves could also be created if an asteroid landed in the ocean. But another and perhaps more likely cause of flooding and giant waves is global warming. If the Earth's atmosphere warms by even a few degrees, huge amounts of the polar ice caps would melt. At the same time, the volume of seawater would gradually expand, and the number and severity of ocean storms, hurricanes, and typhoons would increase dramatically. All in all, a prescription for massive flooding on a global scale. And there can be no doubt anymore that the Earth is heating up. Preliminary findings announced in January of 1996 and reaffirmed in April indicated that Earth's average surface temperature in 1995 was the highest ever recorded, according to the British Meteorological Office. For the first time, a United Nations panel of scientists declared that the global warming trend is, quote, unlikely to be entirely natural in origin, unquote, and that the weight of evidence suggests a discernible human influence on climate. In fact, the constant growth of human population and environmental pollution is now producing numerous signs of coming disaster. The World Meteorological Organization's statement on the status of the global climate 1995 said the hole in the Earth's protective ozone layer, which has become a regular feature over the Antarctic in spring, started earlier and lasted longer than in any previously recorded year. The world's last great rainforest, the Brazilian Amazon, is being leveled at a record rate, not just by Brazilians, but by Asian logging companies that are buying up Amazon tracts the size of small nations. American and Brazilian scientists working in the Amazon say the Brazilian government is actually offering incentives to destroy the forest. The damage, they say, has increased exponentially over the past 2 decades. According to the World Watch Institute, 1995 saw the addition of 88 million more people to the Earth's human population, 167 new people every minute. Most of these people were born in places already straining to feed their current population. Net per capita food production fell, as it has every year since the early 1980s, furthering a trend toward eventual massive food shortages in China, South Asia, Africa, and other populous regions. The United States, one of the few nations with a large grain surplus, now exports grain to over 100 other countries. Japan, by contrast, already imports 77% of its grain. Meanwhile, the next billion people on Earth will be added in just 11 years. In December 1995, the prestigious Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists reported a deterioration in the conditions for global peace and security that had developed since the 1991 collapse of the Soviet Union. The world, they said, is becoming a more dangerous place. 4 years after the signing of the U.S.-Soviet Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, the United States and Russia collectively still possess more than 35,000 nuclear weapons, strategic and tactical. No new arms reduction treaties are in the works. Implementation of START II and the future of the anti-ballistic missile treaty are in doubt. The U.S. administration speaks of hedging its bets against a resurgent Russia, having so far failed to integrate Russia into the community of democratic nations. In Russia itself, nationalists increasingly link the retention of nuclear weapons to national pride. Russian President Boris Yeltsin is in failing health, and the men most likely to succeed him are far less friendly toward the West. The Russian elections of June 1996 showed unexpectedly strong support for a return to communism. Proliferation of nuclear weapons to renegade states such as Libya or Iraq is considered a serious possibility and a grave threat to world security. Israel signaled a hard turn away from the delicate Middle East peace process in its elections of May 1996. Israel is known to possess nuclear weapons. With hopes for a Palestinian settlement again in jeopardy, the Middle East in 1996 is the most volatile place on Earth. Globally, the gap between the few rich and the many poor nations continues to widen, breeding resentment, fear, and desperation. Overall, the global situation is more unstable today than at any time since World War II. While the threats of all-out war are somewhat reduced from the peak levels of the 1980s, the threats posed by deteriorating environmental conditions are greatly increasing, a fact that is downplayed, ignored, and denied by major governments almost as thoroughly as the subject of UFOs. But like UFOs, the reality of our precarious global situation won't be contained much longer. Also like UFOs, the real problems of population growth and runaway environmental destruction, not to mention the possibility of massive earthquakes, simply cannot be controlled by government action alone. No one knows this better than our world leaders. But in the face of predictable deterioration of global stability, even in the face of economic and environmental collapse, the fundamental ambition of every government is only this: stay in power. With this in mind, it is hardly likely that any major government will divulge information on the alien presence that might lead to further breakdown and unrest. On the other hand, carefully measured doses of UFO information might have positive political value. Faced with loss of public confidence, governments everywhere employ the same trick: identify a new enemy. Now that the familiar Cold War polarities are out of fashion, the Western powers face an odd problem. The available enemies aren't very convincing. But just in time, perhaps, a new global enemy, an alien enemy, can be discovered. Such a discovery has great political potential. Former President Ronald Reagan certainly thought so, and said so at least 5 times in public during his presidency. An example was his remark in a speech to the General Assembly of the United Nations, September 21, 1987. Quote, In our obsession with the antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us realize this common bond. I occasionally think how quickly our differences would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. The prospect of an alien invasion has huge currency these days. The summer of 1996 saw two major motion pictures depicting massive alien invasions of the Earth. The first, in the film The Arrival, was portrayed as clandestine, with aliens disguised as humans working in underground bases to modify the Earth's environment away from the human comfort zone and toward the hotter alien preference. The second, in the blockbuster Independence Day, portrayed a wholesale slaughter of humanity by marauding aliens in giant starships. Not to be outdone, popular television programs harped on the invasion theme. Space Above and Beyond depicted an all-out war between Earth forces and the evil alien Chigs. Star Trek Deep Space Nine depicted the shape-shifting Dominion rampaging through the Alpha Quadrant. And Babylon 5 painted the bleakest scenario of all, the entire galaxy overrun by the hideous shadows. All this, of course, is fiction. Yet some researchers are convinced that all those alien special effects aren't restricted to the broadcast networks and movie theaters. Jacques Vallée, one of the world's most respected UFO experts, has long recognized UFO information as political currency. As far back as 1979, in his controversial book, Messengers of Deception, he said, quote, "Several human groups could be manipulating the public's interest in UFOs to further their own political goals. They could try to achieve this by deliberate use of confusion techniques, by planting fake UFO evidence, by amplifying contactee mythology, and by systematically discouraging scientific inquiry into the nature of UFOs," unquote. The full implications of this idea were spelled out in a novel Vallée published in 1996 called Fast Walker. Here, in the guise of fiction, he described a super-secret human group that answered to no one but themselves and had as their goal the complete reorganization of world government under their control. Using high-tech aircraft, virtual reality, and mind control techniques, they were able to create completely realistic UFO sightings and abduction events and used these events to further their political aims. Vallée's book has real aliens, too. Not straightforward extraterrestrials, but inscrutable hit-and-run manipulators who reside in a parallel dimension and remain indifferent to the political intrigues of the human leadership. These aliens, Vallée implies, fail to fulfill any of the mythic expectations of modern UFO enthusiasts. But these very expectations, unfulfilled in reality, provide potentially lethal ammunition for the human elites who mean to rule the world. Jacques Vallée has made huge contributions to UFO research. But is his picture of mostly illusory phenomena created by ruthlessly ambitious humans likely to be correct? With all due respect, probably not. But it's not completely incorrect either. History has repeatedly shown that there are plenty of ruthless people who are willing to do almost anything to rule the world. In recent memory, Nazi Germany is the clearest example of this. Evil as Adolf Hitler was, he could not have come to power had he not been fanatically supported by many other key leaders every bit as evil as himself. This evil was also supported by a phenomenal concentration of German technological genius, a collective genius that created numerous revolutionary flying machines, and led directly to the post-war space programs of both the United States and the Soviet Union. Many people believe that Nazi scientists actually invented real flying saucers. They clearly did experiment with saucer-shaped craft, although the best evidence I've seen suggests these craft did not fly very well. But the Nazis also experimented with genetic engineering, psychic phenomena, and mind control, all with the purpose of eventual world conquest. After the war, hundreds of Nazi scientists were transferred with special privileges to secret laboratories in both the United States and the Soviet Union. Much of their work remains classified to this day, but it is not too far-fetched to believe they did achieve at least some of the strange results described by Jacques Vallée. Nonetheless, I fail to see convincing evidence of a grand conspiracy to reorganize global politics using human-built UFOs or counterfeit aliens. If there is such a thing as a global conspiracy, I suspect it's a conspiracy among the world's most privileged elites to protect themselves and their wealth from a coming time of chaos. They believe the chaos itself will sweep away the underlying problem, which they see as far too many people. Billions of increasingly desperate people, hopelessly unfit for the demands of tomorrow, let alone the reality of aliens. If a collapse should come of the global economy or even the global environment, this privileged elite believe they could survive to rebuild in a much less crowded world. They foresee wars in many places, fought mainly over dwindling supplies of food, water, or fuel. Although broad use of nuclear weapons is very unlikely, chemical and biological agents might be used, hastening the demise of excess population. Through it all, the privileged elite could remain relatively unscathed. The fact is, such a scenario is quite plausible. But I don't believe most of our political leaders are thinking this way, at least not yet. Most of them do not imagine, nor could they condone, the catastrophic demise of billions of innocent people, even if they also cannot precisely explain how to prevent it. They continue to hope, against all hope, that solutions will be found to our mounting global problems. What they cherish most is time. Just a little more time. In this light, official UFO revelations may seem politically absurd. The reality of UFOs and alien contact is potentially so devastating to the status quo that no world leader can feel comfortable thinking about it, let alone admitting it out loud. But the cover-up is cracking. The time of denial is nearly over. With this breakdown of secrecy comes the threat of other breakdowns as well, breakdowns of authority, of time-honored beliefs, of expectations for the future. Though time predictions are notoriously risky, I would not be surprised if these breakdowns begin in earnest before the end of this decade. If we consider the messages of the abductees, it is possible that our alien visitors have planned for all this well in advance. It may be that thousands of ordinary citizens have been subjected to alien indoctrination, even trained for special roles in a coming time of trouble. If this is true, it might mean that at some crucial hour, the most privileged and powerful humans on Earth could discover they're not really in control at all. Given the available evidence, I draw the following conclusions. There is a substantial alien presence on planet Earth, a fact well known to secretive factions within the major governments. There are apparently several different types of aliens active on Earth, displaying a variety of behaviors and agendas, although their true nature remains almost entirely unknown. At least some abduction events involve real human interaction with aliens. While many such events are terrifying to the experiencer, there are few indications of hostility on the part of the abductors and some indications of benevolent intent. Various alien groups are engaged in activities aimed at indoctrinating abductees, reducing human destruction of the environment, and possibly creating hybrid beings suited to the planet's future. The basic problem for human governments in acknowledging the alien presence is loss of control, loss of public confidence, and the mandate to govern. Thus, there is little incentive for any major government to tell the truth about the alien presence. But information is leaking out at an increasing rate. Containment is disintegrating, and the public demand for answers is growing. Therefore, some kind of government acknowledgement is likely within a few years. This will be a delaying tactic aimed at preserving government control, perhaps an admission of some past alien event that gives justification for increased military preparedness. However, the exact nature and outcome of such an announcement, if it happens, is impossible to predict. Of course, if the evidence presented in this program is not true, then the conclusions I've drawn are also unreliable. Further research and the march of time will eventually settle any doubts. Meanwhile, you must judge for yourself. Therefore, I urge you to carry on where this program leaves off. Continue to inquire, learn all you can, share what you find, and make a space in your mind and your heart for the stories told by others who've come closer to the alien presence than you have. They are the pioneers of a new reality, a job most of them never expected and few of them really want. That new reality is coming fast. It will bring turmoil and upset with it, so take heed, don't be complacent. We live in extraordinary times, and the world is far stranger than we thought. This doesn't have to be bad news. It will be what we decide to make of it. together. If you would like to receive frequent updates on UFOs and the global situation by email, you can subscribe to CNI News. Timely, authoritative online reports from around the world on close encounters, UFO politics, space exploration, and scientific investigation of the alien presence, edited by Michael Lindemann. If you can get email, you can get CNI News. For information and a free sample issue, send your request by email to cninews1@aol.com.